Good evening, hello, welcome. Ken has asked me to speak about the amnesty campaign that Neil Godfrey and I did at Collett Dickinson Pierce 20 years ago. 20 years ago this year, in fact, this year being 2010. And so a friend has arrived with some equipment, and so hence the opportunity to make a very short little film to tell you about it. When Amnesty came to us, they had been with both Massini Pollitt, BMP, for some couple of years, and they had run a pretty successful campaign, they thought, using small ads, 20 doubles, in quality papers, The Guardian, Independent, so on. And they had a target of a number of members to achieve. Each new member paid £25 membership fee, and of course they could make additional donations. And then a new member was there to be contacted over the years for all sorts of things, support in letter writing or indeed in fundraising. What Neil and I worked out, however, was that Amnesty's target and its resources didn't kind of match up to each other, and in particular the use of these small spaces wasn't really helping them, because if you took the best result ever achieved by them with a 20 double and then extrapolated it right across their budget, you would still fall far short of the number of members that they wanted to recruit. And the reason for this was quite simple. When Neil and I went to see, we went to the International Secretariat, and we spent many days poring through their cabinets, reading documents, reading letters from people, looking at pictures. And I must say, these were some of the most gut-churning, horrific things you've ever seen. And there was no way, actually, that most of those pictures could have been shown in a newspaper. But what it did to us was it made us incredibly angry, for one thing, and it made us almost instantly committed in a way that I could never have imagined before, because, we were just doing run-of-the-mill advertising. We were at CDP in those days. We were doing Benson and Hedges and Army Officer Recruitment and the Metropolitan Police and all these things. And to work for a human rights organization was something new for me, at any rate. And I think it was like having our eyes opened, and we desperately wanted to tell these stories. I knew that if I had the chance to write the stories as I felt they could be written and should be written, that people would be moved, and people would, they would get angry, they would get outraged, and they would do something. So I was actually away on holiday at the time of the actual pitch, but Neil told me later when I came back, he said, "Well, I've told them straight. I said, you can't do these little piddly little ads, they're no good. You'll have to do full pages." And quick as a flash comes the response, "Well, we know why you want to do full pages. It's because, like all agencies, you just want to win advertising awards, creative awards." So Neil says to me, "So I told them, all right, we do not care about advertising awards. We've won enough already in our lives, and if you if we get your account, we will guarantee that we will not enter any of your work for advertising awards unless you yourselves ask us to." So that was the deal, and on that basis we must have said some other pretty good things, I guess, or he did. He was a smooth-talking Yorkshireman. Actually, no, he's a rather blunt-talking Yorkshireman, but that's probably what did it. And we got the account. It was wonderful. So I came back from holiday and we had the account. So then it was a question of cracking on. And the very first ad we did utilized the space, told the story of street children in Brazil who were being basically just gunned down by police. And We didn't have a horrific picture. We had a group of children, it was a sweet picture actually, a group of children of various ages holding each other's hands waiting to cross a road. There was a big kid and a little kid, like that. And my headline said, in Brazil they've discovered how to keep children off the streets, kill them. Now that produced the most phenomenal response from the public, the readers of the quality papers in which it appeared, and also must have nettled the Brazilian president, because he leapt up and down and made noises and complained to Amnesty and things like that. Amnesty then withdrew the ad, and as our old client John Bagley said recently, it's a pity that they did, because 20 years later street children are still being killed in Brazil. We tried one or two other approaches. We found that politics didn't work. If you wrote about, I mean, asylum seekers is always a very tough subject in Britain, but if you wrote about, say, the legal difficulties that Tamils were having with the Home Office and the things that the Home Office had done and said they would do and didn't do, you know, nobody was interested. What they were interested in was sort of archetypal human stories of pain, I suppose, pain, suffering, that we could bring to them in such a way that they could share. We were asked to do an ad about the Gulf War, the use of torture by Saddam's regime, and as a background to this, I read all the Amnesty reports the past dozen years on Iraq, and of course in every single one they had given details of the most awful tortures, like people's children being executed in front of them and then they're being made to pay for the bullets, and I mean unbelievable sort of collections of the most horrific implements were in use. Werner Herzog made an excellent film called Lessons of Darkness, in which there's a scene where the camera just lingers on this table full of hammers and pincers and pliers and all these things. And Amnesty had been telling the world for years, for 12 years, year after year after year after year. And when I thought about it and thought how little the politicians had paid attention, I mean, I got absolutely livid, and I was writing this and getting angrier and angrier and angrier. And I said, writing on behalf of Amnesty, we told you in 1979 and 1980 and 81 and 82 and 83 and so on, so on, so on, and you did nothing. You, Margaret Thatcher, did nothing. You, George Bush, did nothing, you know. And at which point I couldn't speak anymore. I certainly couldn't write anymore. I took this screed and I gave it to my wife and I said, what do you think of this? And she said, look, this is absolutely the rantings of a madman, you know, which quite clear it was. But nonetheless, it was a ranting and a kind of mad rage that needed to be heard. It needed to be expressed. And it must have been what many people were feeling, except that many people perhaps didn't know that Amnesty had published reports year after year warning of exactly what would happen. So the trick, if you like, if I can call it that, or as the French might call it, the truc, was that we said, okay, and you reading this, you did nothing. But it's not your fault, it's our fault. Because had we had the resources, had we been cleverer at writing than we are, perhaps we could have got that message through. And that's why you must help us, because we need to be better. We've got to have better resources, we've got to do things much better. And I guess it touched a nerve somewhere, because it produced again a massive response. I can think of another ad where, well, there was one, of course, there was on the 30th anniversary of Amnesty's founding by Peter Benenson. He founded in 1961, this would have been 1991. They said, let's do something on our 30th anniversary, and we sat down and thought about it and said, yes, well, Amnesty has done a phenomenal amount of good. I mean, countless prisoners released, people saved from torture, death more than likely, and, you know, saved from unjust an illegal processes rather than legal process, and of course, extrajudicial executions and things like that. They undeniably it had done a fantastic amount, but if you actually looked at the statistics, you see there's actually more torture, more imprisonment, more human rights abuse in the world in 1991 than there had been in 1961. And the client and Neil and I were just sitting talking together, and we came up with the ad on the spot between the three of us, which is how I think ads should be done. And it was this, that when we realized that Agostinho Neto, who'd been one of the first 6 prisoners of conscience of Amnesty, had himself, when he finally became president of Angola, become a torturer and presided over a regime which incarcerated people and did awful things to them. So, what hope is there, really? And so the ad we came up with was, should we give up? He said, yes, we've done lots, but what we've done is like trying to bail the ocean out with a bucket. So should we give up? Should we just say it's too difficult, nobody cares, let's give up? And if you, reading this, think to yourself, no, Amnesty, you should not give up, you must keep doing what you're doing, it's good work, then you can't morally say that without joining us. And this again brought a phenomenal response. So I think what we learned from this is that you've got to find a way of breaking through this carapace that people armor themselves with. They know they're reading an advertisement, and so they know that you're going to ask them for money, they know that you're going to ask them to join their cause. But it's the way you do it, and you have to do it with the utmost respect for one thing, and not sort of boasting, and not being duplicitous in absolutely any way. The final example that I'd like to give you is of what on the face of it was a complete failure, where Amnesty were unable to get into Burma, or Myanmar as the generals call it. They simply weren't allowed in. There wasn't very much pressure they could bring on that regime in any way at all, and of course the most dreadful things were going on in the country, as they still are. And I think it was a Karen tribeswoman who had had to witness her husband being nailed to a tree, crucified, having his genitals cut off and stuffed in his mouth, her little sister raped in the prison camp until she died, herself repeatedly raped. And you thought, well, how on earth can you tell this story? This story was, I think, the worst story that I ever had to tell for Amnesty. And what I did was I wrote a headline. We didn't have a sort of horrific picture or anything. All we had was a picture of her that had been published in a newspaper. It was just a picture of a woman, obviously looking rather grief-stricken, as she would. And so it said, the soldiers who crucified her husband to death, no, the soldiers who crucified her husband and raped her little sister to death will do it again, and again, and again. And there's nothing we can do to stop them. And someone at the agency saw this and said, my God, that not only is that a 33-word headline which breaks all the rules, it is undoubtedly the worst fundraising ad I've ever seen, you see. Luckily the client didn't think so. And we ran it, and it produced an enormous, genuine, outraged and horrified response. Thousands of people joining for one ad. And the reason for that was we told the story and then explained that there was nothing that Amnesty could do because it wasn't allowed in the country. But then here comes the little truc again, the French truc, which I allude to because we are in fact sitting in France, in the south of France, as I speak to you here. The truc was this, that you are angry, you are livid, you are frustrated, you want to do something, there's nothing you can do, there's nothing we can do. Okay, well, don't in that case just turn the page or screw the newspaper up in a rage and hurl it into the bin, because In this case, there's nothing you can do, nothing we can do, but in hundreds of cases in other countries, things which are pretty much almost as bad, you know, I mean, there's catalogues of those vile, vile things. We can do things, we do things, we do save people. So, if you feel frustrated and outraged about this, turn that into something useful and channel it to where you can actually do some real good. And so that's again how that one worked. And I'm speaking here very much about the nitty-gritty. You'll notice I'm not speaking about strategies and I'm not speaking about research. We never did any, we didn't believe in it. You know, you have to trust your heart. You have to write from the heart. You have to be able to use words in such a way that they do touch people. And you can only do that by really feeling it yourself. You have to dig really deep. And that's what Neil and I did. We were completely committed to Amnesty. We still are. And we still work with Amnesty today in various forms. Through the work that I do and my colleagues do in Bhopal, we are working still with Amnesty very closely. So there you are. Anyway, I hope it's been of some interest to you, and I wish you bonsoir.